What is up, everybody? It is me, DevilNeverCry, and in today's video we are back with another lore type video. We'll be going over some interesting things in this video, so do be sure to stick around. And as always, be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with all things DMC. But getting back to the topic of the video, today we're going to be covering the Goldstein family. Now, one of the main reasons that I'm covering the Goldstein family is because, of course, Nicoletta Goldstein, aka Nico. She's a character that has been introduced into the DMC series with DMC5, and her family does have some history with the main cast of characters, so I felt that it would be good to encompass the entire family instead of focusing on just Nico. So without further ado, let's just dive right in, starting with Nell Goldstein. Now, this is the grandmother of Nicoletta Goldstein, and in fact I covered her story and her tragic fate in a previous video way back when, 9 months ago actually, where we sort of went over the events of the first DevilNeverCry novel. Initially, upon the release of the first novel, its canonicity, if that even is a word, was called into question multiple times for a few reasons. The first of which was that the book was based on the works of Kamiya, who, as we know, only made the first DevilNeverCry game, with the subsequent ones being made by Itsuno & Co. And of course, both directors had sort of different visions for the series, so a lot of people sort of discredited that novel based on that fact. The second of which is the fact that there are a few sort of conflicting things in that book that directly conflict with the events of certain games, sort of further discrediting its canonicity in the chronology. Of course, we get mention of Goldstein in this book. A lot of people don't really seem to take notice or even care. However, with the release of the DMC5 before the Nightmare prequel novel, which came out, a week before DMC5's release, a lot of that book has actually been validated, along with the story of Nell Goldstein. To cut a long story short, by the time that Dante had met Nell Goldstein whilst working under the alias of Tony Redgrave as a mercenary, she was already a famed gunsmith, known for her craft and for her .45 caliber weapons. Dante was a repeat customer of NELL'S simply because whenever she gave him weapons to use, he would destroy them almost immediately, causing him to have to go back and get more, which led her to designing and creating Ebony and Ivory, a pair of pistols that could finally match the output of Dante's raw power. And as usual, tragedy strikes in an untimely manner as Dante goes to collect Ebony and Ivory so that he can assemble them. Due to certain events in the book, Nell ends up dying in the arms of Dante as the place burns to cinders. It is of course at this point that Dante sheds the Tony Redgrave alias and vows to fight for justice, becoming the demon hunter that we all know and love. And some of you keen-eyed viewers might actually recognize Nell in the ending of almost all of my videos. That is in fact the final panel where we see Dante and Nell together. But if you want a deeper look at Nell and the events of the first DevilNeverCry novel, I already have a video on that. I'll leave a link in the description for you to check out in your own time. But moving on, we come to the Goldstein family that is mentioned in the DMC5 prequel novel Before the Nightmare. In the prequel novel, we come to find out that Nell was married to a wealthy man by the name of Roy Martin, with whom which she had a son by the name of Rock Goldstein. The family lived together happily up until Rock turned 7. It was at this point that Rock decided to sneak into his mother's workshop, a place that he was forbidden to go considering that's where Nell made all of her weapons, upon which, after messing around with one of the guns that Nell had created, he ended up blinding himself in one of his eyes. It was at this point that Roy got fed up with Nell and told her that she had to stop making guns. To her, this seemed like a death sentence. And even though it may have been a death sentence to her, it was something that she had considered doing just so she could keep her family together. Her conviction to remain a gunsmith was ever strengthened when Rock decided to pay her a visit that very same night to apologize. He blamed himself for what happened and didn't want her to feel upset. It was at this point that Rock had handed her a piece of paper with a crudely drawn medal on it, titling her a .45 artworks caliber artist. Of course, with Rock being only 7 years old, he ended up misspelling artworks, but this is the genesis point for the branding that you see on all of NELL'S weapons. The artworks misspelling was something that was pointed out in the original DevilNeverCry novel, and you can see it on all of the renditions of Ebony and Ivory up until DMC5, and that is for one particular reason we'll get to later. After receiving such an award from her son, Nell continued to make weapons, resulting in the divorce of her and Roy. It didn't take long for Roy to remarry after his divorce, which means that Rock ended up with a new sibling by the name of ALYSSA. Growing up, Rock Goldstein was forbidden from seeing his own mother, unfortunately, and with the birth of ALYSSA, all of Roy and his new wife's attention focused on her, leaving Rock to feel sort of estranged from this new family. Years pass, and eventually Rock begins working at Ouroboros. This isn't the first time we've heard of this company, by the way. Shout out to DMC2, what a wild throwback that is, with the Ouroboros company featuring in there. But getting back to the point, Rock ends up working in the weapons development department for this company, where he ends up learning about his mother's whereabouts for some reason or another. Unfortunately though, Rock is unable to visit his mother due to the company's strict working conditions, but he eventually ends up finding the time off to go see her, but at that point she had been dead for 6 months. It was at this point, out of rebellion and rage, that Rock ends up abandoning his father's surname of Martin and becomes Rock Goldstein. He quits the Ouroboros company and opens a small gun shop titled Rock's Guns and Ammos in an attempt to be a successor of his mother. It was at this point that Rock's father ends up being quite furious at the fact that he left his job, one that he actually helped him get, and in response, Rock shuns him, stating that he is proud to be a Goldstein. Shortly after he opens Rock's Guns and Ammo, Rock's father and stepmother die. He contemplates why exactly that is, and finally decides on the fact that it must have been a suicide, considering that Roy had accrued an insurmountable amount of debt due to a failed investment. This means that his stepsister, ALYSSA, ends up with nowhere to go, and considering that she is a relative, he decides to take her in. So after ALYSSA settles in with her brother Rock, she lands a job at Ouroboros, where Rock used to work. There she meets a researcher and ends up falling in love, and lo and behold, the researcher turns out to be Agnus. There you have it. People always ask me who could find it in their heart to love somebody that looks like Agnus, and there's your answer. People didn't believe me when I said that Agnus is Nico's father way back when 7 months ago in October when I made this video, but there is your definitive proof. Getting back to the Goldstein family though, soon after Agnus and ALYSSA fall in love, ALYSSA ends up getting pregnant, where she quits her job and Nicoletta is born. The book states that the first 2 years after Nicoletta's birth, everything is going fantastic for the Goldstein family, but then tragedy just rolls on in a timely manner and ruins everything, as usual. On a seemingly random day, Agnus tells ALYSSA that he needs to go back to Fortuna on His Holiness's orders. Now the family knew that he belonged to the Order of the Sword, this weird cult-like religion, but seeing as he wasn't out there sacrificing animals and whatnot, they didn't really seem to care. But Agnus was adamant that he needed to return to Fortuna. Of course, Agnus denied ALYSSA's request for her and Nicoletta to come along, stating that only believers can live in Fortuna. She says that she can become a believer, but Agnus says that that would be impossible and that she'd never understand what it is they do. And then a few days later, Agnus just up and disappears. ALYSSA of course wants to pursue Agnus to Fortuna, but there's that tragedy again, and ALYSSA is struck with an incurable disease, where she is hospitalized for pretty much the remainder of her life. She always wanted to go to Fortuna, but a few years pass by and ALYSSA dies without ever being able to go. After ALYSSA's death, Rock decides to legally adopt Nico and raise her as his own. He doesn't intend for her to become a gunsmith, but seeing as that's what he does for a living, she ends up becoming interested anyway. Whilst Nico is perusing through the shop's wares on one random day, she comes across an image of Ebony and Ivory, where Rock reminisces about the man who brought them in. We come to find out that Dante had brought Ebony and Ivory to Rock's Guns and Ammo to correct a spelling mistake on the guns. Dante states that he didn't want any old rubbish gunsmith to correct the spelling mistake, as Ebony and Ivory were considered a work of art. Dante states that the only one who's worthy enough of touching those guns is Rock himself. Rock, of course, recognizing the spelling and the weapons, holds back tears as he decides to fulfill Dante's requests, stating that he feels that would be the last time he'd ever see him. As time passes by in the novel, Nico sets out for Fortuna, not to look for her father Agnus, but for other work. She tells Rock that she's given up on the dream of being a legendary gunsmith and instead wants to focus on making weapons that are works of art. And as Nico heads to Fortuna, the chapter on the Goldstein family closes. But there is one thing that I do want to briefly mention, and that is the blood relations. So Rock and Nico are connected by blood through his half-sister ALYSSA, but there is no blood relation or blood connection between Nico and Nell. Despite this, Nico always refers to Nell as her grandmother, yet whenever she speaks to or refers to Rock, she doesn't even call him a father, which I find to be a rather interesting tidbit. But with all that said and done, that is going to round out the Goldstein family video. I tried to pack in as much information as possible, but for the sake of brevity and pacing, there were a few minor details that I skipped over, simply because I don't want to be reciting things word for word from the novel. I find it rather interesting how the family's been embroiled in tragic event after tragic event, but I am glad we finally got an explanation into the Goldstein family, and especially the little details like the .45 artworks spelling mistake. That was something that I'd imagine was just a simple spelling mistake that they decided to sort of run with and build an entire story around. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. As always, if you liked today's video, be sure to leave a thumbs up and show the channel some support. With all that said and done, it has been me, DevilNeverCry. I would like to thank all of you for watching, and as always, I'll see you next video.